In this video, we're going to take a look at graphing polynomial functions, but in particular, we are going to pick out intervals of increase and decrease. So let's just take a look at a couple of examples. This polynomial has already been graphed, and some things have been picked out over here in red. So we know the maximum number of turns was 1, there were 2 real zeros, they were located at negative 3.4 and 1.4. There is a minimum value of negative 1, negative 6. Now that's going to be important for our intervals of increase and decrease. So I'm going to write interval, and sometimes there's more than one, so I'm just going to put that in parentheses. So interval or intervals of increase for this graph. All right, so if you're looking at this graph, you can tell that it goes from left to right. It starts to go, let me use a different color. So it starts to go down from left to right until you get to that minimum value. And then after that value, it starts to increase. So it goes up. And again, looking from left to right. So my interval of increase would be from x equals the negative 1 from that minimum point. And then it continues on to positive infinity. So my interval of increase I would write as negative 1 to infinity. And then let's write interval, and I like to put the S in parentheses because sometimes there's more than one. So interval or intervals of decrease. So we already noted that in the beginning of this graph from left to right, it starts at negative infinity for x. You're always looking at the x value for these intervals, and then it goes down until you get to that minimum point. And again, x equals negative 1 right there. So we would say that this graph decreases from negative infinity up to negative 1. You're always looking at the x values to pick these out. Okay, let's look at another example. So this polynomial is already on my graph. I've got all this good information over here, but really the turns of the graph are what helps me pick out my intervals. So I'm going to put that we had a minimum value. They've noted over here was 0, 0, and you can see that on the graph. We had 2 maximum points. There was one at negative 0.7 and 0.4, and another one located at 1.4, 2.8. And I'm just going to write that 1.4 a little bit better. Okay, so those always help, and they're already picked out for you for this example, so that's nice. All right, so from the left to the right, our first interval of this graph is increasing. So this graph increases from negative infinity, because that's what that arrow at the bottom is indicating, that it's going to go to the left forever. And then it increases up to x equals negative 0.7. You're always picking out that x value. So let's write that down. Interval or intervals of increase. So we had from negative infinity up to negative 0.7. We're always looking at the x's. And then there's another interval of increase from 0 up to 1.4. So we could just write, and there's another interval from 0 to 1.4 that is increasing. Now let's write the intervals of decrease. And there can always be more than one of those as well. So we're going to look at the intervals that are going down from left to right. So this little interval in between negative 0.7, so that x value, to 0. So negative 0.7 to 0. And then another interval that's going down or decreasing is going from x equals 1.4, and then it's going to continue to the right forever. So we would say that it's decreasing from 1.4 to infinity. So for this graph, there were 2 intervals of increase and 2 intervals of decrease. There's no limit to how many intervals of each that you could have in a graph. But let's just take one more example to look at. Let's see. This one is just fine. So we're going to look at the minimums and maximums and go ahead and label those. It's nice that they've already got those picked out for you. So let's put this minimum point is negative 0.2. 3.9. And this little minimum point is 2.6, negative 4.5. And then the maximum point was 0.6, 4.6. Those are like the turns in your graph. So then let's pick out intervals of increase. So intervals of increase. Let me write it a little bit better. Are, and let's pick out where is this graph increasing or going up from left to right. So there's a little interval of increase right there, and then there's one at the end. 2 intervals of increase. So it looks like it's increasing from negative 0.2 up to 0.6. So let's write negative 0.2 to 0.6 is increasing. And also from 2.6 to infinity, because it's going to the right forever. Okay, and let's pick out intervals of decrease. And you don't have to write these in this order. You could put decrease first and increase second. It's just the order I've gone with for these examples. All right, so it's decreasing in this first interval from negative infinity up to that x value of negative 0.2. And we have another interval of decrease from 0.6, so the x value of 0.6 up, or down, I should say, down to 2.6. So from 0.6 to 2.6, it was also decreasing. All right, so we had 2 intervals of increase again and 2 intervals of decrease. So that's it, just to show you a few examples of how to pick out intervals of increase and decrease.